Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Three in the morning. It's always 3 in the morning when I wake up hearing those sounds again. My new house is over 1,000 miles from Olympic National Park, but still, I still hear them. My wife says they're just nightmares. She wasn't there. She didn't see what I saw that October night. My name is Garrett Valdez, and I need to tell someone this story. It's been almost 3 years since I left my job as a forest ranger and moved from Washington to Nevada. From the endless green of the Olympic Peninsula to this desert where you can see for miles in every direction. No trees, no shadows, no places for someone to hide and watch you. I worked at Olympic National Park for 2 years. I know that doesn't sound like much, but in ranger terms, I wasn't exactly green anymore. I'd handled lost hikers, bear encounters, medical emergencies. I thought I knew what danger looked like in the wilderness. I was wrong. Completely wrong. The thing about the Olympic Peninsula that people don't understand until they've been there is how dense it gets. We're talking about temperate rainforest, some of the thickest vegetation in North America. Moss hanging everywhere, ferns taller than a person, trees so massive and close together that daylight becomes this filtered green twilight even at noon. It's beautiful, but it's also the kind of place where you can lose someone forever, just 50 feet off a main trail. October 2021. The autumn rains had started early that year, turning every trail into a muddy obstacle course. The tourist season was winding down, which meant longer shifts for those of us still on duty, and a lot more solo patrols. I actually preferred it that way. Less chatter on the radio, more time to think. That's when Iris Camwell went missing. She was 19, a sophomore at Portland State studying environmental science, solo hiker, which wasn't unusual, but she'd registered for a 3-day backpacking trip on the Hoh River Trail. When she didn't check out at the trailhead office by Tuesday evening, her roommate called it in. Standard missing hiker protocol. I remember getting the call from dispatch around 6 p.m. Valdez, we've got a missing person report. Young female, 3 days overdue on the Hoh River Trail. The voice was Sarah Chen, our evening dispatcher. She'd been there for 15 years and had that practiced calm that comes from handling thousands of these calls. Any medical conditions? Experience level? I asked, already grabbing my gear bag. Clean bill of health, experienced hiker according to the roommate. But here's the thing. Her car is still at the trailhead and there's been no activity on her credit cards or phone since Sunday. That got my attention. Most missing hikers turn up within the first 12 hours. They take a wrong turn, get disoriented, spend a cold night in the woods, and come stumbling out in the morning, sheepish but fine. When someone's been gone for 3 days with no sign of voluntary departure, the statistics start looking a lot worse. I drove out to the Hoh River trailhead as the last light was fading from the sky. October in western Washington means darkness by 6:30, and the perpetual cloud cover makes it come even faster. Her car was there, a blue Honda Civic with Oregon plates, parked exactly where it should be. No signs of forced entry, no obvious problems. I checked in with my supervisor, Ranger Captain Morris, over the radio. Control, this is Valdez at Hoh River Trailhead. Subject's vehicle is secure, no signs of disturbance. Requesting permission to begin preliminary trail search. Copy that, Valdez. Weather report shows heavy rain moving in around midnight. I'm calling in a full search team for first light tomorrow, but do what you can tonight. Standard check-in schedule. Standard check-in schedule meant radio contact every 30 minutes. In theory. I started up the trail with my headlamp, following the clear path that runs alongside the Hoh River. The sound of rushing water masked a lot of ambient noise, but I could still hear the usual sounds of an Olympic forest at night. Owls calling, branches creaking in the wind, the occasional rustle of something small moving through the underbrush. The first mile of the Hoh River Trail is easy hiking, well-maintained and clearly marked. I checked every obvious camping spot, called out Iris's name every few hundred yards, and swept my light across the forest on both sides of the trail. Nothing. About 2 miles in, I found her first campsite. The clearing was maybe 50 feet off the trail, exactly the kind of spot an experienced backpacker would choose. Close enough to water, level ground, natural windbreak from the surrounding trees. Her tent was still set up, a quality 3-season model, properly staked and guy-lined. But it was empty. I called it in. Control, this is Valdez. I've located what appears to be the subject's campsite at approximately mile marker 2. Tent is present and undisturbed, but no sign of the subject. Static crackled for a moment before Morris came back. Any signs of animal interference, bear activity? Negative. Everything looks normal, almost too normal. And that was the first thing that bothered me. The tent was perfect. I mean perfect. Every stake driven to exactly the right depth, every line tensioned correctly, rainfly positioned with military precision. Most people, even experienced hikers, are a little sloppy with their setup. This looked like something out of a camping manual. I unzipped the tent and swept it with my light. Sleeping bag rolled neatly, backpack organized. No signs of hasty departure. But no personal items either. No toiletries, no spare clothes, no food. Either she'd packed everything for a day hike, or someone had cleaned out the tent. Control, Valdez. The tent appears to have been cleaned out. All personal effects are missing. Copy. Any sign of which direction she might have headed? I spent the next 20 minutes circling the campsite with my light, looking for footprints, disturbed vegetation, anything that might indicate a direction of travel. The problem with the Olympic Peninsula in October is that everything is wet all the time. The ground was soft enough to take prints, but the constant drizzle had washed away anything more than a few hours old. Finally, I found something. About 30 yards east of the campsite, deeper into the forest, there was a faint trail. Not an official trail, more like a game path, the kind deer use to move between feeding areas. But there, pressed into a muddy patch between 2 fallen logs, was a clear boot print. Size looked about right for a young woman. I keyed my radio. Control, Valdez. I've got a possible trail heading east from the campsite. Faint boot print consistent with hiking boots. Requesting guidance. The response took longer than usual. When Morris came back, his voice carried a tension I hadn't heard before. Valdez, be advised we've just received additional information on the subject. According to her roommate, Iris Camwell was planning to research illegal hunting activity in the area for a journalism class project. My stomach dropped. What kind of illegal hunting? Unknown, but local Game and Fish have had reports of unusual animal carcasses found in the deeper forest areas over the past 6 months. Someone may be operating an unlicensed hunting operation. Illegal hunting meant people with weapons who had good reason to avoid law enforcement. It meant someone might see a missing college student as a threat to their operation. It changed everything. Copy that, Control. Should I continue on the trail? Your call, Valdez, but I want check-ins every 15 minutes from now on. And if you encounter anything that suggests human activity other than the subject, you back out immediately and wait for the team. I looked into the dark forest ahead of me. The game trail disappeared into a wall of vegetation so thick my headlamp beam couldn't penetrate more than 20 feet. Every instinct I had was telling me to wait for backup, to approach this with a full team in daylight. But somewhere out there, a 19-year-old girl might be in serious trouble, and I had at least 4 hours before the search team would arrive. I followed the trail. The path wound deeper into the forest, following what seemed to be natural contours in the landscape. After about half a mile, it started climbing, switchbacking up a steep ridge I didn't recognize from any of the official park maps. My radio started crackling with static, not unusual in the deep forest where the trees interfere with signal transmission. I checked my GPS. The screen flickered, showing my location as a blue dot surrounded by blank green space. I was officially off the mapped trails now, in the kind of wilderness where people could disappear without a trace. The climbing continued for another 20 minutes, before the trail leveled out along what seemed to be a ridgeline. I could hear water somewhere below, probably a tributary of the Ho River. But what caught my attention was something else entirely. Smoke. Just a faint trace, barely detectable, but definitely the smell of wood smoke. Someone had a fire burning somewhere ahead of me. I keyed my radio but got only static in response. The trees up here were massive, old-growth Douglas firs and Sitka spruces that had been standing for centuries. Their canopy was so thick that no starlight penetrated to the forest floor. I turned off my headlamp and let my eyes adjust to the darkness. After a few minutes, I could make out a faint orange glow flickering through the trees, maybe a quarter-mile ahead. This was the decision point. I could turn back, wait for the team, approach this with proper backup and support, or I could investigate a potential lead on a missing person who might be running out of time. I moved forward, staying off the trail and picking my way carefully through the underbrush. The smell of smoke grew stronger, mixed now with something else, the scent of cooking meat. As I got closer, I could make out the details of what appeared to be a camp. Not a backpacker's camp. This was something more substantial. A large canvas wall tent, military surplus by the look of it. A properly constructed fire ring. Multiple tarps strung between trees to create covered work areas. And hanging from a rope between two trees about 50 feet from the fire was what looked like a deer carcass. I crept closer, using the massive tree trunks as cover. The fire was burning low, just coals now, but there was enough light to see the setup more clearly. This wasn't a hunting camp, it was a base camp. Someone had been living here for weeks, maybe months. That's when I saw the other things hanging from the rope. Not deer, smaller animals. Raccoons, maybe a couple of beavers. But they'd been processed. Skinned and cleaned with surgical precision. More than that, they'd been butchered in a way that seemed almost ritualistic. Specific cuts, organs removed and arranged in small piles on a large flat rock that served as a makeshift table. I was looking at the work of someone who enjoyed killing things, someone who took time with it. My radio crackled suddenly with a burst of static so loud I nearly jumped out of my skin. I fumbled for the volume control, but the sound had already echoed through the forest. The flap of the wall tent moved. I froze, pressing myself against the trunk of a massive cedar tree. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure whoever was in that tent could hear it. For what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, nothing happened. Then the tent flap opened completely, and a man stepped out. He was big, maybe 6'2", broad shoulders, military bearing. He wore dark clothing and moved with the kind of careful silence that comes from training. In his hands was a rifle, something with a scope, definitely not standard hunting equipment. He stood perfectly still for a long moment, scanning the forest around the camp. I could see his face in the firelight, sharp features, maybe 40 years old, completely calm. This wasn't someone who'd been startled awake. This was someone who'd been expecting company. Very slowly he raised the rifle and swept it in a methodical arc across the tree line. When the barrel pointed in my direction, I stopped breathing entirely. After what felt like an eternity, he lowered the weapon and walked to the fire. He stirred the coals with a long stick, bringing up a small flame, then added a piece of wood. The increased light revealed more details of the camp, and what I saw made my blood turn cold. Arranged around the perimeter of the camp were objects that definitely hadn't come from animals. A hiking boot, a water bottle, a piece of fabric that looked like it had been torn from a jacket, trophies. And propped against a tree on the far side of the camp was a bright blue backpack that looked exactly like the one described in Iris Camwell's missing person report. I had to get out of there. Had to get back to radio range and call in backup. But as I started to move, I heard something that made me freeze again. A voice. Weak, muffled, coming from somewhere near the tent. Please, please, I can't. I need water. It was a young woman's voice. Iris was alive. The man by the fire heard it too. He said something in a low voice. I couldn't make out the words, and the pleading stopped immediately. I was 50 yards away from a kidnapper with military training and high-powered weapons. I had a service pistol, a radio that wasn't working, and no backup for at least 3 hours. Every piece of training I'd ever received said to retreat, establish communication, and wait for support. But that voice, She sounded weak, desperate. How long could she survive whatever this man was doing to her? I made the worst decision of my career. I decided to try a rescue. Moving as quietly as possible, I began circling the camp, trying to get a better view of where Iris might be held. The forest floor was treacherous in the dark. Fallen logs, hidden holes, branches that could snap and give away my position. Every step took forever. As I moved, I could see the man more clearly. He'd settled into what looked like a routine patrol around the perimeter of his camp. He moved with professional efficiency, checking specific points, pausing to listen at regular intervals. This wasn't paranoia. This was security protocol. Whoever this guy was, he'd done this before. I managed to work my way to a position about 30 yards from the tent. From this angle, I could see that there was a second, smaller structure, maybe a lean-to or dugout shelter, built into the hillside behind the main tent. That's where the voice had come from. The man completed his patrol and went back to the fire. He pulled something from a pack beside his seat. It looked like a radio, military style with a long antenna. He spoke into it quietly for several minutes, but I couldn't make out the words. When he finished with the radio, he stood and walked toward the lean-to shelter. "Time for your next lesson," he called out, loud enough for me to hear clearly. The response was immediate, sobbing, pleading. "No. Please, I told you everything I know. I don't know anything about illegal hunting. I was just researching for a class project. Please, education is a process," the man replied, his voice calm and conversational. "You can't learn everything in one session." I heard the sound of a tarp being moved, then a muffled scream that was quickly cut off. That's when I lost all rational thought. I drew my service weapon and started moving toward the camp, not toward the lean-to where Iris was being held. That would mean crossing open ground where the man could see me coming. Instead, I circled toward the main tent, hoping to use it as cover and maybe find a better angle. I made it about 20 yards before I stepped on something that shouldn't have been there. It felt wrong immediately, too regular, too artificial. When I looked down, I could see a thin wire stretched between two stakes driven into the ground, a perimeter alarm. The sound it made wasn't loud, just a soft metallic ping. But in the stillness of the forest, it might as well have been a fire alarm. "Well, well," came the man's voice from the direction of the lean-to. "Looks like we have a visitor." I dropped into a crouch behind the nearest tree and tried to think. He knew I was here, but did he know exactly where? The alarm would tell him I'd come from this direction, but the forest was thick enough that I might still have some concealment. "You know," he called out, his voice casual and conversational. "I was wondering when one of you rangers would finally show up. Took longer than I expected." I stayed silent, trying to pinpoint his location by sound. He was moving, but quietly. Professional movement. "Here's what's going to happen," he continued. "You're going to put your weapon on the ground and step into the light. If you do that, the girl lives through the night. If you don't, well, let's just say her education is going to accelerate considerably." To emphasize his point, I heard Iris cry out in pain. I had maybe 10 seconds to make a decision that would determine whether we both lived or died. Give up my weapon and hope I could find an opportunity later, or try to outfight a trained killer on his own territory in the dark. 5 seconds, he called. I made my choice. I put my pistol on the ground and stepped into the firelight. The man was standing beside the lean-to, his rifle trained on me with professional accuracy. Up close, I could see more details. Military-style clothing, combat boots, gear that looked expensive and well-maintained. This wasn't some random psychopath. This was someone with serious training and resources. "Smart choice," he said. "Now, let's have a conversation." He gestured for me to move closer to the fire, keeping the rifle pointed at my chest the entire time. When I was about 10 feet away, he nodded toward a log that had been arranged as seating. "Sit." I sat. From this position, I could see the lean-to more clearly. It was a crude but effective shelter built into the hillside, covered with tarps and camouflaged with branches. I could hear movement inside. Iris was alive, but I couldn't tell her condition. "What's your name, Ranger?" the man asked. "Valdez." First name? I hesitated. Giving personal information to a captor is never a good idea, but with a rifle pointed at me, I didn't have much choice. Garrett. Well, Garrett, my name is Marcus Thorne, and you've just walked into something much bigger than a simple missing person case. He settled into a position where he could watch both me and the approaches to the camp. The rifle never wavered from center mass. See, your friend Iris there isn't just a college student researching illegal hunting. She's been asking very specific questions about very specific activities. Questions that suggest someone has been feeding her information. What kind of activities? Marcus smiled, and it was the most unsettling expression I'd ever seen. The kind that require a lot of privacy and generate a certain amount of waste disposal challenges. It hit me then. This wasn't about illegal hunting. This was about something much worse. How many? I asked. How many what? How many people have you killed? The smile widened. Well, that depends on how you count. Are we talking about official military actions? Or are we discussing my private research projects? From the lean-to came a muffled sound. Iris trying to say something through what sounded like a gag. She's trying to tell you about the others, Marcus said casually. We've had some very educational conversations over the past few days. Haven't we, sweetheart? He raised his voice for the last part, and I heard Iris make a sound that might have been agreement or might have been terror. The thing is, Garrett, you've presented me with a bit of a problem. See, I've got a very good thing going here. Remote location, no witnesses, easy disposal methods. But now I've got 2 people who know about my operation. If you let us go, we won't. Please. He cut me off with a wave of his hand. Don't insult either of our intelligence. You're a law enforcement officer. She's a journalism student. Neither of you is going to just forget what you've seen here. He was right, of course. Even if we promised to stay quiet, even if we meant it in the moment, eventually we'd have to report what we'd found. Too many people were missing. Too many families were waiting for answers. So here's what we're going to do, Marcus continued. We're going to play a little game. Call it Advanced Wilderness Survival Training. What kind of game? The kind where you run, and I hunt you. If you can make it back to civilization and bring help before I catch you, you both win. If I catch you, he shrugged. Well, let's just say my research will have 2 new subjects. I looked around the camp trying to assess options. My pistol was still on the ground where I'd left it, about 15 feet away. The forest around us was dense and dark. I didn't know the terrain, and Marcus obviously did. There are rules, of course, he said. First, you get a 30-minute head start. I'm going to finish my conversation with Iris, secure the camp, and then the hunt begins. What about her? Oh, she's coming with me. Insurance, you might say. As long as you keep running and don't try anything heroic, she stays alive. But if you double back, if you try to play rescuer, if you do anything other than run straight back toward the main trail, he let the implication hang in the air. Second rule, no equipment. You run with what you have on your body right now. No flashlight, no radio, no weapons. He walked over and picked up my pistol, ejecting the magazine and checking the chamber before tossing both pieces into the darkness beyond the fire. Third rule, and this is important, you have until sunrise, about 6 hours. If you can reach the main trail and bring back help before then, the girl lives. If not, well, sunrise is when I start getting creative with my teaching methods. I calculated distances in my head. We were at least 3 miles from the main trail, probably more, through dense forest in the dark, over terrain I didn't know. Even if I could maintain a good pace, which was unlikely given the conditions, it would take me at least 2 hours to reach the trailhead. Another hour to drive to the ranger station, assuming my truck started. Another hour for them to organize a response team. I'd be cutting it very close. Why? I asked. Why not just kill us both now? Marcus tilted his head, considering the question. Because this is more interesting. Because I want to see what you're capable of when everything depends on it. Because the fear and desperation will make you both more responsive to instruction. He was a sadist, but he was also giving me a chance, even if it was a slim one. "Your 30 minutes starts now," he said, checking what looked like a military chronometer on his wrist. I stood up slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. "How do I know you'll keep your word? How do I know you won't just kill her as soon as I leave?" "You don't. But consider this. If she's dead, you have no incentive to follow the rules. You might decide to find a good hiding spot and wait for the search team instead of running. That wouldn't be nearly as much fun." It was twisted logic, but it made sense from his perspective. He needed Iris alive to ensure I played his game. "Any questions?" he asked. "Yeah. What happens if I win? What happens if I bring back help?" The smile returned. "Then you'll have earned the right to bury whatever's left of us." With that cheerful thought, I turned and walked toward the edge of the camp. As I reached the tree line, Marcus called out one more time. "Oh, and Garrett, just so you know, this isn't my first time playing this game, but it might be yours." I plunged into the forest and started running. The first few minutes were pure adrenaline. I crashed through the underbrush, stumbled over logs, bounced off trees in the darkness. Branches whipped across my face, roots caught my feet, and within 100 yards I was bleeding from a dozen small cuts. I forced myself to slow down. Panic would get me killed faster than Marcus would. I needed to think, to move intelligently. I tried to retrace the route I'd taken to find the camp, but everything looked different in the darkness. Without my headlamp, I was essentially blind. The forest canopy blocked out any ambient light from the stars, leaving me in a world of pure black. I felt my way from tree to tree, trying to maintain a consistent direction downhill. The theory was sound. The camp had been on a ridge, so going downhill should eventually bring me to water, and water would lead me back toward the main trail. But theory and practice are very different things when you're stumbling through a temperate rainforest in total darkness. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, I stopped to rest against a large tree and tried to think through my situation. I was lost. I had no light, no navigation equipment, no way to call for help. Somewhere behind me was a trained killer who knew these woods intimately and would be starting his pursuit in about 10 minutes. The smart thing would be to find a good hiding spot and wait for the search team. They'd be starting their operation at first light, which was still about 5 hours away. If I could stay hidden until then, I might have a chance. But Iris didn't have 5 hours. Marcus had been very clear about what would happen at sunrise. I started moving again, more carefully this time. I tried to use my other senses to navigate. The sound of water, the feel of the wind, the way the ground sloped beneath my feet. Slowly, I began to develop a mental map of the terrain around me. That's when I heard the first sound of pursuit. It wasn't much, just the faint snap of a branch somewhere behind me. But in the absolute stillness of the forest, it might as well have been a gunshot. I checked my watch. My 30-minute head start should have had another 5 minutes to run. Either Marcus had decided to start early, or I'd been moving slower than I thought. I picked up the pace, trying to balance speed with stealth. The sounds behind me were getting closer. Not the random crashes of someone stumbling through the dark, but the measured, careful movement of someone who knew exactly where he was going. He was tracking me. In total darkness, through dense forest, he was following my trail with the precision of a bloodhound. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Marcus had night vision equipment. Of course he did. Military training, expensive gear, months to prepare his hunting ground. He could see me stumbling around in the dark like a drunk tourist. I needed to change tactics. Instead of trying to outrun him, I needed to outthink him. He expected me to head straight for the main trail, to run in a panic toward help. What if I didn't do what he expected? I angled off to the right, away from what I thought was the direction of the main trail. If Marcus was following my tracks, this might throw him off for a few minutes. More importantly, it might give me time to find some kind of advantage. The terrain got rougher as I moved laterally across the hillside. I found myself climbing over fallen logs, squeezing between rock formations, crawling under tangles of vegetation. It was slow going, but it was also the kind of terrain that would be difficult to track through even with night vision. After about 10 minutes of this, I found what I was looking for: a creek. It was small, maybe 3 feet wide, but it was running fast and deep enough to step in. Water doesn't hold tracks. If I could follow this downstream for a while, I might be able to break my trail and gain some time. I stepped into the creek and immediately regretted it. The water was shockingly cold, snowmelt from the peaks above. Within seconds, my feet were numb. But I forced myself to start walking downstream, staying in the water even when it got deeper. The creek meandered through the forest, sometimes running through narrow channels between rock walls, sometimes spreading out into marshy areas where I had to feel my way carefully to avoid stepping into deep holes. I followed it for what felt like an hour, until I was shivering uncontrollably and could barely feel my legs. Finally, I climbed out onto the bank and tried to warm up enough to continue. That's when I heard Marcus's voice, impossibly close, coming from just upstream. "Very clever, Garrett. Using the water to break your trail. That's exactly what I would have done." I froze. He was maybe 50 yards away, following the same creek I'd just left. Of course, you're not the first person to try that particular trick. Did you know that body heat shows up quite clearly through night vision? Even when you're standing in cold water, you still glow like a Christmas tree. I started moving again, as quietly as possible. He was close enough that any sound would give away my position. "The thing is," Marcus continued, his voice getting closer, "you're thinking like someone who's trying to escape. But this isn't an escape scenario. This is a hunt. And in a hunt, the prey that tries to be clever usually ends up dead faster than the prey that just runs." I could hear him walking through the water now, maybe 30 yards behind me. I needed distance, but I also needed to avoid making noise. The combination was nearly impossible. "You know what I think, Garrett? I think you're not really trying to get away. I think you're trying to be a hero. I think you're planning to circle back and try to rescue the girl." He was wrong, but not by much. The thought had occurred to me. If I could somehow get behind him, double back to the camp, maybe I could free Iris and we could escape together. "Let me save you the trouble. The camp is empty. I brought the girl with me. She's about 100 yards behind me right now, tied to a tree where she can watch everything that happens next." My blood turned to ice. If Iris was nearby, if she was going to witness whatever Marcus had planned, then this had moved beyond a hunt into something much worse. "Iris," I called out, abandoning any attempt at stealth. "Are you okay?" "She can't answer," Marcus replied. "Gag. But she can hear you just fine. Would you like to say goodbye?" That's when I snapped. I turned and started running straight toward his voice. If he was going to kill us both anyway, if this was all just elaborate torture, then I was going to make him work for it. I crashed through the forest, making no attempt to be quiet. Behind me, I could hear Marcus laughing. "There we go, now you're playing the game properly." I ran harder, pushing through vegetation that tore at my clothes and skin. My lungs burned, my legs shook with exhaustion, but I kept moving. I had to reach the main trail. I had to bring help. The terrain started to level out, which meant I was getting close to the river valley. The main trail followed the Ho River, so if I could just find the water, I could follow it back to civilization. That's when I saw the light. At first I thought it was Marcus with a flashlight, but it wasn't moving like a handheld light. It was steady, positioned maybe a quarter mile ahead of me through the trees. As I got closer, I could make out details. It was definitely artificial light, too bright and too steady to be a campfire. Maybe another camp? Maybe other people who could help? I altered my course toward the light, hope flaring in my chest for the first time in hours. But as I got within 100 yards, I could see what it actually was, and my hope died completely. It was a floodlight, powered by what looked like a portable generator. It was set up to illuminate a small clearing in the trees, and in the center of that clearing was something that made me understand just how long Marcus had been planning this. It was a cage. Not a crude wilderness construction, but an actual metal cage, maybe 8 feet square, built from what looked like chain-link fencing and steel posts. It was the kind of thing that would require multiple trips to transport and hours to assemble. And inside the cage was a person. I crept closer, using the surrounding trees for cover. The person in the cage was alive. I could see them moving. but I couldn't make out details from my position. As I watched, Marcus emerged from the forest on the far side of the clearing. He was carrying his rifle in one hand and dragging someone behind him with the other. Iris. Even from a distance, I could see she was in bad shape. She could barely walk, and there were dark stains on her clothing that could have been blood or mud. Marcus dragged her to the cage and started working on a padlock that secured the door. "Look who I found," he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the clearing. He came running just like I said he would. The person already in the cage moved toward the door. In the harsh light of the flood lamp, I could see it was a young man, maybe college age. He was wearing hiking clothes and looked like he'd been there for days. "Please," the young man said, his voice hoarse. "Please just let us go. We won't tell anyone, we promise." "Now, Jason, we've been through this," Marcus replied, opening the cage door. "Promises are easy to make and easier to break. Actions, on the other hand, tell us who people really are." He shoved Iris into the cage next to Jason, then secured the door again. "Garrett," Marcus called out. "I know you're out there. Come on down and join the party." I stayed hidden, trying to think. There were now 2 hostages in a cage, and Marcus with a rifle standing guard. Even if I could somehow get to my pistol, assuming I could find the pieces in the dark, the odds of a successful rescue were essentially 0. "You know," Marcus continued, "I'm getting a little impatient, and when I get impatient, I tend to take it out on my students." He walked to the cage and reached through the chain link to grab Jason by the shirt. "This young man has been with me for 4 days now. We've covered a lot of ground in his education, but there's still so much he could learn." He pulled out what looked like a combat knife and held it where I could see it clearly. "Garrett, you have 30 seconds to show yourself, or Jason here is going to contribute to a very interesting anatomy lesson. I couldn't let him hurt an innocent person because of me." I stepped out from behind the trees, my hands raised. "Good boy," Marcus said, lowering the knife but keeping it visible. "Now walk over here nice and slow." As I approached the clearing, I could see the full scope of what Marcus had built. This wasn't just a cage, it was a complete field laboratory. There were tables set up under tarps, surgical instruments laid out with military precision, and what looked like recording equipment mounted on tripods. "Welcome to my classroom," Marcus said as I reached the edge of the clearing. "This is where the real education happens." I looked at Jason and Iris in the cage. Jason appeared to be in his early 20s, with dark hair and the kind of lean build that suggested he was probably a hiker or climber. He had multiple bandages on his arms and what looked like surgical incisions that had been carefully stitched closed. Iris was conscious but barely responsive. Her eyes were unfocused and she swayed slightly even while sitting. Whatever Marcus had been doing to her, it had taken a severe physical and psychological toll. "What did you do to them?" I asked. "Research," Marcus replied simply. "You'd be amazed what the human body can endure when properly managed. How much pain someone can experience and still remain functional. How fear affects decision-making under extreme stress." He gestured toward the tables with their array of instruments. "I've been documenting everything. Heart rate, blood pressure, stress hormone levels, pain responses. It's fascinating work." "You're insane." "Am I?" "I spent 12 years in special operations, Garrett. 12 years learning how to break people, how to extract information, how to push human beings past their breaking points. The military taught me these skills, then sent me home and expected me to just forget them." He walked closer, the rifle still trained on me. "But you can't just turn off that kind of knowledge. It becomes part of who you are. So I found a way to continue my research in a more independent capacity. How many people have you killed?" "Killed?" Marcus looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Garrett, you're thinking about this all wrong. I don't kill people. I educate them. I help them discover things about themselves they never knew." He pointed toward Jason. "This young man, for example, he thought he was brave. He came out here alone, confident in his outdoor skills, ready to conquer the wilderness. But under the right kind of pressure, he learned that bravery is just another word for ignorance." Jason looked at me with eyes that held too much knowledge. Whatever Marcus had taught him, It had broken something fundamental inside. The girl has been even more interesting, Marcus continued. She came here thinking she was going to expose some simple poaching operation. Instead, she's learned about the true nature of predation, about what happens when someone becomes prey. Where are the others, I asked. The missing hikers from the past 6 months? Marcus smiled. Oh, they graduated. They learned everything I had to teach them. The implication was clear. I was looking at a serial killer who had been using Olympic National Park as his personal hunting ground for months. But enough conversation, Marcus said. It's time for your education to begin. He reached into a pack beside one of the tables and pulled out a set of leg shackles connected by a short chain. Put these on. I looked at the shackles, then at the cage, then back at Marcus. Once those were locked around my ankles, any chance of escape would be gone. I'd rather not. That wasn't a request. He raised the rifle to his shoulder, aiming at Jason. Put them on, or I start the anatomy lesson right now. I had no choice. I took the shackles and locked them around my ankles. The chain was maybe 18 inches long, enough to walk but not enough to run. Excellent. Now let's discuss the curriculum. Marcus walked to one of his tables and picked up what looked like a medical chart. Phase 1 involves basic stress testing. We'll be exploring your pain tolerance, fear responses, and decision-making under duress. Phase 2 focuses on psychological breaking points, how much pressure it takes before someone abandons their principles. Phase 3, he paused dramatically. Well, let's just say very few students make it to Phase 3. He set down the chart and picked up a small device that looked like a cattle prod. We'll start with something simple, a baseline measurement of your electrical pain threshold. The prod sparked as he activated it. The sound made both Jason and Iris flinch in their cage. But first, Marcus said, I want you to understand the rules. You can scream as much as you want. We're miles from anywhere. You can beg, you can plead, you can offer me anything you think I might want. But the education will continue until I decide you've learned enough. He stepped closer, the prod held ready. The only variable is how much you suffer along the way. Cooperate, and I'll keep the lessons manageable. Resist, and I'll have to escalate the teaching methods. I looked around the clearing, desperately searching for anything that might give me an advantage. The generator powering the floodlight was about 10 feet away. If I could somehow reach it, maybe I could plunge the area into darkness and level the playing field. But with the leg shackles, I couldn't move fast enough to reach it before Marcus could stop me. I can see you thinking, Marcus said. That's good. Problem-solving under stress is an important skill. But let me save you some time. I've been doing this for months. Every possible escape route has been considered and blocked. To prove his point, he pulled out a small remote control and pressed a button. Immediately, the forest around the clearing lit up with additional lights, smaller spotlights positioned in the trees, creating a perimeter of illumination that extended at least 50 yards in every direction. Motion sensors, he explained. If anything larger than a raccoon moves within that perimeter, the lights activate, and I get an alert. Even if you somehow got away from me, you'd never make it out of the clearing without being detected. He pressed another button, and I heard the sound of machinery activating somewhere in the forest. Portable electric fence, Marcus said casually. Non-lethal, but it delivers quite a shock. It's positioned about 100 yards out, completely surrounding this area. Think of it as the boundaries of my classroom. I was trapped. Completely, thoroughly trapped by someone who had spent months preparing for exactly this scenario. Now, Marcus said, stepping closer with the prod, let's begin your education. The first shock hit me in the ribs and dropped me to my knees. It wasn't the worst pain I'd ever experienced, but it was sharp, intense, and completely unexpected. Every muscle in my torso contracted at once, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Excellent response, Marcus said, making notes on his chart. Strong involuntary muscle contraction, approximately 4-second recovery time. Let's try a different location. The second shock hit my shoulder. This time I was ready for it, but that didn't make it any less painful. I managed to stay on my feet, but just barely. Interesting, you're adapting already. That suggests good pain tolerance and learning capability. From the cage, I could hear Iris making small sounds of distress. Whether she was reacting to my pain or reliving her own experiences, I couldn't tell. "Don't worry about them," Marcus said, noticing my attention. "They've been through this already. They know what to expect." He activated the prod again, and this time I was ready. Instead of trying to resist the shock, I let it drop me to the ground and used the momentum to roll toward the generator. I didn't make it far. The leg shackles caught and twisted, sending me sprawling in the dirt about 3 feet from where I'd started. "Clever," Marcus said approvingly, using the expected response to mask an escape attempt. "I like that. But as you can see, the classroom has been designed to prevent exactly that kind of thinking." He shocked me again while I was still on the ground. This time it was worse. The electricity seemed to travel through the wet earth, amplifying the effect. "That's lesson 1, Marcus said as I struggled to get back to my feet. "The environment is not your friend. Everything here is designed to work against you." I managed to stand, though my legs were shaking from the repeated shocks. "Now, let's move on to lesson 2, psychological pressure." Marcus walked to the cage and unlocked the door. Jason immediately pressed himself against the far wall, but Marcus reached in and grabbed Iris by the arm. "No," I said. "Leave her alone." "But that's the point of the lesson," Marcus replied, pulling Iris out of the cage. She could barely stand, and he had to support most of her weight. "You see, Garrett, physical pain is just one form of education. Psychological pain can be much more effective." He dragged Iris to one of his tables and forced her to sit on what looked like a medical examination chair. "This young lady has already learned a great deal about fear, about helplessness, about what happens when all your assumptions about the world turn out to be wrong." He strapped Iris into the chair with practiced efficiency. She didn't resist. Whether from injury, drugs, or simple shock, I couldn't tell. But there's still more she could learn. Much more. Marcus picked up a scalpel from his instrument tray and held it where I could see it clearly. "Here's your choice, Garrett. You can continue your own education, accept the pain and the lessons I have to teach you, or you can watch while I provide Miss Camwell here with some advanced instruction in anatomy." "Don't," I said. "Please. Do whatever you want to me, but leave her alone." But that's exactly the point. The most effective education comes from understanding that your choices have consequences for other people. He pressed the scalpel against Iris's arm, not cutting, but making his intention clear. "Every time you resist, every time you try to escape, every time you do anything other than exactly what I tell you, she pays the price." I looked at Iris, strapped to the chair, barely conscious but aware enough to understand what was happening. I looked at Jason in the cage, his eyes holding the knowledge of what Marcus was capable of. And I looked at Marcus himself, completely calm, completely in control, waiting for my decision. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "Simple. I want you to learn. I want you to understand what it means to be truly helpless. I want you to discover who you really are when everything you believe about yourself is stripped away." He set down the scalpel but kept his hand on it. "We'll start with basic obedience training. Kneel." I knelt. "Good. Now crawl to the table over there and bring me the syringe that's laying on the tray." I looked at the table. The syringe was filled with something clear, probably a sedative or paralytic agent. Whatever it wasn't going to make the situation better. "I won't help you drug her. Then she learns about surgical procedures while fully conscious." Marcus picked up the scalpel again and made a small cut on Iris's arm. She screamed through her gag, a sound that cut through me like a physical blow. "Stop," I shouted. "I'll get it." I crawled to the table, the leg shackles making the movement awkward and humiliating. The syringe felt heavy in my hand as I picked it up. "Bring it here." I crawled back to Marcus and held out the syringe. He took it, checked the contents, and prepared to inject Iris. "Please," I said. "What is it?" "Ketamine, mostly. It will make her more manageable, less likely to injure herself during the more intensive lessons." He injected the drug into Iris's arm. Within seconds, her struggles became weaker, her breathing more shallow. "There we go," Marcus said, checking her pupils with a small flashlight. Much better. He turned back to me. Lesson 3. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is help someone become unconscious before the real pain begins. The drug was taking full effect now. Iris's head lolled to one side, and her eyes rolled back until only the whites were showing. Perfect. Now we can continue your education without interruption. Marcus walked back to his instrument table and selected what looked like a military field medical kit. Tell me, Garrett, what do you know about field surgery? Nothing. Well, you're about to learn, because you're going to perform a minor surgical procedure. He opened the kit, revealing an array of surgical instruments, sutures, and medical supplies. Nothing complicated, just a simple incision and suture, but you're going to do it while experiencing electrical stimulation at regular intervals. He held up the cattle prod. Every 30 seconds you'll receive a shock. You'll have to maintain surgical precision while dealing with involuntary muscle contractions and significant pain. I'm not going to cut into an unconscious person. Oh, you're not going to cut her, Marcus said. You're going to cut yourself. He pointed to my left arm. Simple procedure. Make a 2-inch incision along your forearm, then suture it closed. Think of it as practice for when you need to treat more serious injuries. No. Then she wakes up, and we continue her lessons instead. Marcus walked to another table and picked up what looked like an adrenaline injector. This will counteract the ketamine, bring her back to full consciousness, and then we'll see how much she can learn about pain tolerance. I looked at the surgical kit, then at Iris unconscious in the chair, then at Jason watching from the cage with desperate, knowing eyes. How do I know you'll keep your word? How do I know you won't hurt her anyway? You don't. But consider this, if you refuse, she definitely gets hurt. If you cooperate, she might not. Those are the only odds you're going to get. It was an impossible choice, but it wasn't really a choice at all. I picked up the scalpel. Excellent, Marcus said. Now remember, every 30 seconds you get shocked. Try to maintain surgical precision despite the distraction. I positioned the scalpel against my forearm. The blade was sharp enough that even light pressure drew a thin line of blood. Deeper, Marcus instructed. This needs to be a real incision, not just a scratch. I pressed harder, and the blade cut through skin and into the muscle beneath. The pain was immediate and intense, but it was nothing compared to what happened when Marcus activated the cattle prod. The shock hit me just as I was making the deepest part of the incision. My hand jerked involuntarily, and the scalpel cut much deeper than intended, slicing down to what felt like bone. Interesting, Marcus said, making notes. Loss of motor control resulted in approximately 200% deeper incision than intended. Let's see how you handle the suturing. Blood was pouring from the wound now, more than I'd expected. I tried to apply pressure with one hand while reaching for the sutures with the other. No pressure, Marcus said. Let it bleed. That's part of the lesson. The suture needle felt impossibly small and slippery in my blood-covered fingers. Threading it was difficult under normal circumstances. Trying to do it while blood dripped from my arm and knowing another shock was coming in 20 seconds was nearly impossible. I managed to get the thread through the needle just as the second shock hit. This time I was ready for it, but ready didn't mean much when 50,000 volts were coursing through your body. The needle flew from my fingers and landed somewhere in the dirt. You'll need to find that, Marcus said calmly. Surgical instruments are expensive. I dropped to my knees and searched for the needle in the dim light. My arm was bleeding steadily now, leaving a trail of drops in the dirt. I found the needle just as the third shock hit. This time I managed to hold onto it, but the thread came unthreaded. Interesting adaptation, Marcus noted. You're learning to anticipate the stimulus. That's exactly the kind of behavioral modification I'm looking for. I rethreaded the needle and tried to start suturing the wound. The first stitch was clumsy and uneven, but it held. The second stitch was better, but then the fourth shock hit right as I was pulling the thread tight. The involuntary muscle contraction caused me to jerk the suture so hard it tore through the skin, making the wound worse instead of better. Failure to adapt, Marcus observed. You're still fighting the stimulus instead of working with it. I'm trying. I said through gritted teeth. Not hard enough. Perhaps you need additional motivation. Marcus walked to the cage and opened the door again. This time he pulled Jason out. No, Jason said weakly. Please, I can't. I can't do it again. Your friend here needs to understand the consequences of poor performance, Marcus told him. Marcus strapped Jason into a second chair that I hadn't noticed before. Like everything else in the clearing, it had been positioned and prepared in advance. Continue your suturing, Marcus told me, but now Jason here will receive a shock every time you make a mistake. That's not fair, I said. I can't control the shocks you're giving me. Life isn't fair, Marcus replied. That's one of the most important lessons anyone can learn. To demonstrate his point, he activated a second cattle prod and shocked Jason. The young man screamed and writhed against his restraints. That was for your complaint about fairness, Marcus explained. Now continue the suturing. I tried to focus on the needle and thread, tried to block out Jason's presence, tried to pretend that my mistakes wouldn't result in someone else's pain. But it was impossible. The fifth shock hit me just as I was starting a new suture. My hand jerked, and the needle went through my skin at the wrong angle, creating a tear instead of a clean closure. Immediately, Marcus shocked Jason. His scream echoed through the forest, and I could see tears streaming down his face. Please, I begged. Just shock me. Don't hurt him. But then you wouldn't learn properly, Marcus explained. The whole point is that your actions have consequences for other people. That's what separates this from simple pain tolerance training. I tried again. The sixth shock hit me, but this time I managed to maintain enough control to complete the suture properly. Better, Marcus said approvingly. You're starting to understand. It took 12 more shocks and 4 more mistakes, each resulting in Jason being electrocuted, before I finished suturing the wound on my arm. By the end, both Jason and I were shaking uncontrollably, and my arm looked like it had been sewn up by a drunk medical student. Excellent work, Marcus said, examining my crude surgical job. You've learned several important lessons. First, that you can perform complex tasks even under extreme stress. Second, that other people pay the price for your failures. And third, that you're capable of inflicting suffering on an innocent person if the alternative is worse. He was right about the last part, and that realization was almost worse than the physical pain. I had continued suturing, continued making mistakes, knowing that each mistake would result in Jason being tortured. And I had done it anyway, because the alternative was letting Iris be hurt even worse. Now, Marcus said, let's move on to the advanced curriculum. He walked to yet another table. How many had he set up in this clearing? And pulled out what looked like a military field radio. This is a ANPRC 117 multiband radio, military grade, satellite capable, range of about 50 miles under ideal conditions. He held it up so I could see it clearly. There's a National Guard unit conducting training exercises about 30 miles from here. If someone were to call for help on the right frequency, they could have helicopters here within an hour. Hope flared in my chest, but I knew there had to be a catch. Here's the lesson, Marcus continued. You get to call for help, but you have to choose who gets rescued. He gestured toward Iris, still unconscious in her chair, and Jason slumped over in his restraints. The helicopters will only have room for one additional passenger besides you. You get to decide which of your fellow students graduates to freedom and which one continues their education with me. I won't make that choice. Then they both stay, and the education continues for everyone. Marcus set the radio on a table between the two chairs, equidistant from both prisoners. You have 5 minutes to decide. After that, the radio goes away and we move on to lessons that involve significantly more permanent forms of instruction. I looked at Iris and Jason. Iris was younger, probably had more of her life ahead of her. But she was also unconscious and might not survive whatever Marcus had planned if she stayed. Jason was awake, aware, could make his own choice about fighting or surviving. But he'd already been here for 4 days and looked like he was close to his breaking point. What happens to whoever stays behind? I asked. They continue their education until they've learned everything I have to teach them. And then? Marcus smiled. Then they graduate to a higher level of understanding. It was a euphemism for death, and we all knew it. I can't choose, I said. I won't choose. Then in 4 minutes and 30 seconds, the radio goes away forever. I walked to the radio and picked it up. It was heavier than I'd expected, military equipment built to survive battlefield conditions. The frequency display showed numbers that meant nothing to me. You'll need to tune to 243.0 MHz, Marcus said helpfully. That's the emergency frequency the guard monitors. I started to tune the radio, then stopped. Once I made the call, once I chose who to save, I'd be collaborating in the murder of the other person. I need more time. Life doesn't give you more time when you need it, Marcus replied. That's another important lesson. I looked at Jason. He was conscious, watching me with desperate eyes. Take her, he whispered. She's young. She hasn't had the time I've had. No, I said. We're all getting out of here. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Marcus held all the cards. He had the weapons, the equipment, the knowledge of the terrain. Even if I somehow managed to call for help, even if helicopters showed up, he could disappear into the forest before they arrived. 3 minutes, Marcus announced. I tuned the radio to the emergency frequency. Static filled the clearing, punctuated by occasional bursts of military communication. The National Guard unit was out there just 50 miles away, but they might as well have been on the moon. I keyed the microphone. Mayday, Mayday. This is Forest Ranger Garrett Valdez. I have a situation at... I paused, realizing I had no idea where we were. I'm somewhere in Olympic National Park, requesting immediate assistance. Static answered me. Mayday, Mayday. Forest Ranger requesting emergency assistance. Multiple hostages. Armed suspect. More static. 2 minutes, Marcus said. I tried again, this time on a different frequency. Still nothing but static, and the occasional burst of routine military traffic that didn't seem to be responding to my calls. They can't hear you, Marcus said. Atmospheric conditions, terrain interference, distance. Radio communication is never as reliable as people think it is. But as he spoke, a voice came through the static. Faint, distorted, but definitely human. Station calling Mayday, this is Guard Base. Say again your location and nature of emergency. My heart leaped. They'd heard me. Guard Base, this is Forest Ranger Garrett Valdez. I'm being held hostage along with 2 civilians by an armed suspect in Olympic National Park, requesting immediate assistance. Copy that, Ranger Valdez. Can you provide coordinates? I looked at Marcus. He was watching me with interest, but no apparent concern. Negative on coordinates. I'm somewhere in the interior, approximately 3 miles from the Ho River Trail. Armed suspect has military training and extensive equipment. Understood. We're launching search and rescue now. Can you describe the suspect? White male, approximately 40 years old, military experience, heavily armed. He's got at least 2 hostages in a clearing with multiple structures and equipment. Copy. ETA on search aircraft is 40 minutes. Can you maintain your position? Marcus gestured for me to hand him the microphone. When I hesitated, he pointed the cattle prod at Jason. I gave him the radio. Guard Base, this is the suspect you're looking for, Marcus said calmly into the microphone. I want you to know that I have explosive devices placed throughout this area. If I detect any aircraft or ground personnel approaching, I will detonate them. Sir, this is Captain Morrison with the National Guard. Let's talk about this. What do you want? What I want, Captain, is for you to understand that this is not a rescue scenario. This is an educational exercise. Your ranger friend here is learning some very important lessons about decision-making under pressure. Marcus handed the microphone back to me. Tell them about your choice. I keyed the microphone. Guard Base, the suspect is forcing me to choose which hostage gets evacuated. I won't make that choice. Sir, we don't negotiate with hostage takers. We'll get everyone out. No, Marcus said, taking the microphone again. You'll get one person out. The ranger has 30 seconds to decide which one, or you get nobody. He handed me the microphone and started counting down from 30. Guard Base, I said desperately. Do not approach until I give the all clear. Repeat, do not approach. He has explosives. Roger that. Standing by. 20 seconds, Marcus announced. I looked at Iris, still unconscious, and Jason, watching me with resignation in his eyes. 10 seconds. Jason mouthed the words, "Take her," again. 5 seconds. I made my choice. Guard base, prepare to evacuate one female hostage, approximately 19 years old, unconscious, possible drug overdose. Marcus smiled and nodded approvingly. Excellent decision. You chose based on logic rather than emotion. The younger subject has better survival prospects and hasn't been compromised by extended captivity. Jason's face showed no surprise, only a sad acceptance that broke my heart. However, Marcus continued, there's one more lesson to learn. He walked to a control panel I hadn't noticed before and pressed a series of buttons. Immediately, I heard a series of small explosions in the forest around us. Not large enough to cause serious damage, but loud enough to be clearly heard. Guard base, Marcus said into the radio. I've just detonated some of my perimeter charges as a demonstration. The next detonations will be much larger and will occur if I detect any approach by your aircraft. There was a long pause before the response came. Sir, we're showing multiple small explosions on thermal imaging. Are you injured? Everyone here is fine, Captain. But I want you to understand that I'm completely serious about the consequences of premature rescue attempts. Marcus set down the radio and turned to me. The real lesson, Garrett, is that sometimes there are no good choices. Sometimes every option results in suffering for innocent people. And sometimes the most moral thing you can do is choose the lesser evil. He was right, and I hated him for it. I had chosen to save Iris because she was younger, because she hadn't been broken by days of torture, because she represented the better chance of survival. But in making that choice, I had condemned Jason to whatever Marcus had planned for him. The helicopters will be here soon, Marcus continued. But before they arrive, there's one final lesson. He walked to Jason and began untying his restraints. This young man has been my student for 4 days. He's learned about pain, about fear, about the limits of human endurance. But there's one lesson he hasn't had yet. Marcus pulled Jason to his feet. The young man could barely stand on his own. He's going to learn about sacrifice. Marcus handed Jason a knife, the same combat knife he'd threatened me with earlier. Here's how this works, Marcus explained. In about 30 minutes, those helicopters are going to arrive. When they do, I'm going to disappear into the forest. But before I go, someone needs to pay the price for this rescue operation. He gestured toward me and then toward Iris. Jason here gets to choose. He can kill the ranger who made the decision to abandon him, or he can kill the girl who was chosen over him. Either way, he gets to live. Refuse to choose, and I kill all 3 of you before the helicopters arrive. Jason looked at the knife in his hands like it was a venomous snake. I can't, he whispered. I won't, then you'll all die, Marcus said simply, and the education ends for everyone. The sound of helicopters was becoming audible in the distance, still far away, but approaching fast. Decide quickly, Marcus advised. You have maybe 5 minutes before they get here. Jason looked at me, then at Iris, then at the knife in his hands. I could see the internal struggle playing out on his face. 4 days of torture and psychological manipulation warring against whatever moral foundation he still possessed. Don't do it, I told him. Don't let him turn you into what he is. But he's right, Jason said, his voice breaking. You did choose her over me. You condemned me to stay here. I made an impossible choice in an impossible situation. That doesn't mean you have to become a killer. Easy words, Marcus observed, from someone who's going home while Jason stays behind to continue his education. The helicopters were getting closer, maybe 3 minutes out. Jason raised the knife, and for a moment I thought he was going to attack me. Instead, he turned toward Marcus. No, he said. I won't do it. Kill me if you want, but I won't become like you. Marcus nodded approvingly. Excellent. That was the real lesson. whether you could maintain your humanity even after everything you've experienced. You passed. He took the knife from Jason's hands and cut the young man's restraints completely. "All three of you are going home," Marcus said. "The helicopters will take you to safety and you'll go back to your normal lives." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "What's the catch?" "No catch. You've all learned what I wanted you to learn. The education is complete. The helicopters were directly overhead now, searchlights sweeping the forest." Marcus walked to the edge of the clearing and shouldered a large backpack I hadn't seen before. "But remember," he called out over the noise of the rotors, "everything you experienced here was real. Everything you learned about yourselves, about what you're capable of under pressure, about the choices you're willing to make. That knowledge is permanent." He disappeared into the forest just as the first helicopter touched down in the clearing. The rescue was efficient and professional. Military medics attended to Iris and Jason while investigators secured the scene. I gave my statement to what seemed like dozens of different officials: National Guard, FBI, Park Service, local law enforcement. They found Marcus's camp, his equipment, his detailed notes on what he called his educational experiments. But they never found Marcus himself. Despite search teams, tracking dogs, and aerial surveillance, he had vanished into the Olympic Peninsula wilderness as completely as if he had never existed. The investigation revealed that Marcus Thorne was a former Special Forces operator who had been discharged from the military 3 years earlier following a psychological evaluation. His real name was Marcus Kellerman, and he was wanted in connection with disappearances in at least 4 other national parks. Jason recovered physically from his ordeal, though he never spoke publicly about what had happened during his 4 days in captivity. Iris had been drugged with a cocktail of sedatives and hallucinogens that left her with memory gaps and psychological trauma that took months of therapy to address. I received commendations for my actions, but they felt hollow. I had walked into a situation I wasn't prepared for, made decisions that resulted in prolonged torture for innocent people, and ultimately been rescued by forces beyond my control, rather than any heroism on my part. 3 months later, I resigned from the National Park Service and moved to Nevada. I tell people I left because I wanted a change of scenery, because I was tired of the constant rain and wanted to live somewhere with clear skies and open spaces. That's partly true. But the real reason is that I can't look at a forest anymore without wondering what might be watching from the shadows. Marcus was right about one thing: the education was permanent. I learned things about myself in that clearing that I wish I could forget. I learned that when forced to choose between 2 innocent lives, I could make that choice. I learned that I could watch someone be tortured and continue following orders if the alternative seemed worse. I learned that survival instincts could override moral convictions when the pressure became great enough. Most of all, I learned that Marcus Thorne is still out there somewhere, in some other wilderness, providing other people with the same educational opportunities he gave us. Sometimes at 3 in the morning, I wake up thinking I hear helicopters, but more often I wake up hearing something else. The sound of someone moving through the forest with perfect stealth. The whisper of branches being carefully moved aside. The almost inaudible footsteps of someone who knows exactly where they're going and what they plan to do when they get there. My wife thinks they're nightmares. She's probably right. But sometimes when I look out at the Nevada desert from my bedroom window, when I can see for miles in every direction with no trees, no shadows, no places for anyone to hide, I still have the feeling that somewhere out there, Marcus is continuing his research. And sometimes I wonder if the real lesson he wanted us to learn was that the education never really ends, that once you've been his student, you carry a part of that experience with you forever, questioning every choice you make, wondering what you're really capable of when everything you believe about yourself is stripped away. I never return to Olympic National Park. I never will. Some lessons are too dangerous to review. 3 in the morning. It's always 3 in the morning when I wake up hearing those sounds again. My new house is over 1,000 miles from Olympic National Park, but still, I still hear them. The way the rainforest breathes at night, how it swallows sound and spits back echoes that don't belong to anything natural. My wife says they're just nightmares. She wasn't there. She didn't see what I saw that October night when the moss-covered trees became a maze designed by something that used to be human. I need to tell someone this. It's been almost 6 years since I left Washington and moved to Vermont, where the forests are different, cleaner somehow, less ancient, less hungry. The trees here don't hold secrets the way the Olympic Peninsula does, but Vermont's autumn reminds me too much of that October, when the fog rolled in from the Pacific and never seemed to lift, when the temperature dropped just enough to make your breath visible and your fingers numb inside your gloves. My name is Garrett Thorne. I was a forest ranger at Olympic National Park for 8 years before the Iris Caldwell case destroyed everything I thought I knew about the wilderness. Now I work at a hardware store in Montpelier, and I've never spent a night alone in the woods since. My wife thinks I should forget, move on, stop seeing that therapist in Burlington. But some things don't leave your head, no matter how much you try. What happened that autumn changed everything I thought I knew about predators. It started October 15th, 2019. The Olympic Peninsula gets about 140 inches of rain a year, and by mid-October the rainforest is at its most dangerous, not because of the weather, but because of the way it transforms. The massive Sitka spruces and Douglas firs create a canopy so thick that darkness comes at 4 in the afternoon. The forest floor, carpeted in centuries of moss and fallen logs, muffles every sound until you can't tell if that snap behind you is a branch falling or something following. I'd been stationed at the Hoh Rainforest Visitor Center for 3 years. Before that, I'd worked the coastal areas and the mountain regions, but the Hoh was different. It's one of the last temperate rainforests in the continental United States, and it has a way of making people disappear. Not maliciously, or so I thought then, but because it's easy to lose the trail when everything looks the same, and your GPS can't penetrate the canopy. The call came in at 2:47 p.m. Iris Caldwell, 28, marine biologist from the University of Washington, hadn't returned from her research expedition. She'd been studying mycorrhizal networks in old-growth forests, basically how tree roots communicate through fungal connections. Fascinating stuff, and it required her to go deep into areas where most visitors never venture. Her research advisor, Dr. Marcus Chen, had dropped her off at the Hoh River trailhead 3 days earlier. She was supposed to hike 8 miles in, set up her equipment, collect samples, and hike back out. Simple. Except Iris never showed up at the predetermined extraction point. I remember thinking it was routine. We got maybe 24 search and rescue calls every autumn, hikers who overestimated their abilities, researchers who got turned around, photographers chasing the perfect shot who forgot that the forest doesn't care about your artistic vision. The Pacific Northwest wilderness has a way of humbling people fast. But Dr. Chen seemed unusually agitated when I interviewed him at the visitor center. He kept checking his phone, running his hands through his gray hair, looking out the windows at the tree line like he expected Iris to materialize from the shadows. She's experienced, he insisted. PhD in marine biology, but she spent more time in these forests than most of your rangers. She knows what she's doing. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it made me more worried. Experienced hikers are the ones who take risks. They're the ones who think they know the forest well enough to bend the rules. I called it in to my supervisor, Ranger Captain Elena Vasquez, and she authorized a search party. Standard protocol. 3-person team, overnight gear, GPS beacons, satellite phone for emergency contact. I'd lead, with Rangers Amy Holbrook and Derek Seneca as backup. Amy was a rookie, 6 months on the job, eager to prove herself. Derek had been with the service for 12 years, mostly in Montana before transferring to Washington. We entered the Hoh at 6 a.m. the next morning, October 16th. The fog was so thick you couldn't see 20 feet ahead, and the temperature was holding steady at 38 degrees. Perfect conditions for hypothermia if someone was injured and couldn't keep moving. The Hoh River Trail is well maintained for the first few miles, but once you get past the ranger station, it becomes what we call a social trail. Paths carved by researchers and serious hikers, marked with occasional cairns and faded ribbons tied to branches. Dr. Chen had given us Iris's research plan, which showed her intended campsite near a grove of 500-year-old spruces about 8 miles in. That first day, we found her base camp. It was set up perfectly. MSR tent properly staked, bear canister hung at regulation height, research equipment organized in waterproof cases. Her sleeping bag was rolled out inside the tent, and there were signs she'd spent at least one night there. But no Iris. "She's got good wilderness protocol," Derek observed, examining the campsite. "This is textbook setup." Amy was photographing everything with her digital camera, another standard procedure. "Her pack's gone," she noted. "And look, her boots." She pointed to muddy footprints leading away from camp toward what looked like a game trail. The footprints were clear in the soft earth. Size 7 boots, Vasca brand based on the tread pattern, heading southeast toward a section of forest that didn't appear on any official trail maps. I'd hiked that area before during training exercises. It was old growth, beautiful, but treacherous. Fallen logs created natural obstacles, and the canopy was so dense that even GPS had trouble maintaining satellite connection. We followed the trail for 3 hours. The footprints were easy to track at first. Iris had stepped in several mud patches, and the Pacific Northwest soil holds impressions well. But as we got deeper into the forest, the trail became inconsistent. Sometimes we'd find clear boot prints, other times nothing for 50 yards. Then suddenly they'd reappear heading in a completely different direction. "She's zigzagging," I told the team during our 2 p.m. check-in. "Either she's lost and backtracking or she's following something." "Following something?" Amy asked. She was breathing hard. The altitude wasn't extreme, but hiking through old growth is exhausting. You're constantly climbing over fallen logs, pushing through undergrowth, navigating around massive root systems. "Animals," Derek explained. "Researchers sometimes track elk or deer to find specific plant specimens. Could be she found an interesting mycorrhizal network and she's mapping it." That made sense, but something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet. In 8 years of working Olympic National Park, I'd learned to read the wilderness like a language. The sounds tell you everything: bird calls, rustle of small animals, the distant crack of settling wood. That afternoon there was nothing. Even the ever-present drip of condensation from the canopy seemed muted. We made camp that evening near a natural clearing where our satellite phone could get signal. I called in our status to Captain Vasquez. "Base camp located, subjects trail identified, continuing search tomorrow. Weather holding, team condition good." But I didn't mention the silence. I didn't mention that Amy's GPS had been giving inconsistent readings all afternoon, or that Derek's compass seemed to swing randomly whenever we stopped to check our bearing. Equipment malfunctions happen, especially in the high moisture environment of the rainforest. Electronics don't like 90% humidity. That night I woke up at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of someone walking around our camp. Footsteps. Deliberate, measured, circling our tents in a pattern that suggested someone was studying our setup. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening, trying to determine if it was an animal. Black bears are common in the Olympic Peninsula, and they're curious about human campsites. But these footsteps were too regular, too purposeful. I unzipped my tent flap and looked out. The fog had thickened overnight, creating a gray wall maybe 10 feet from our camp. The footsteps had stopped, but I had the overwhelming sensation of being watched. Not the vague paranoia you sometimes get in the wilderness, but the specific, focused feeling of eyes examining you with intelligent intent. "Hello?" I called out, keeping my voice low so as not to wake Amy and Derek. "Iris, is that you?" Nothing. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of my tent. The beam penetrated maybe 15 feet into the fog before being swallowed completely. I swept it in a circle around our camp, looking for any sign of what had been walking around us. That's when I found them. Boot prints in the soft earth around our campsite. But not the Vasque treads we'd been following. These were different, larger, deeper, with a military-style lug sole pattern. Size 11 or 12. Someone had been walking around our camp, and it wasn't Iris Caldwell. I should have woken Derek and Amy immediately. Protocol dictated that any evidence of unknown persons in the area should be reported and documented. But I didn't want to alarm them unnecessarily. There are plenty of legitimate reasons someone might be in the backcountry. Other researchers, experienced hikers, even illegal marijuana growers who use remote forest areas for cultivation. Instead, I took photos of the prints with my digital camera and made a note in my log. I'd mention it in the morning if we found more evidence. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. At dawn, the fog lifted partially and we continued tracking Iris's trail. The boot prints led us deeper into the old growth, toward an area I'd never explored, a section where the trees were so massive and so densely packed that they created natural corridors, like walking through a cathedral made of living wood. Amy's GPS was acting up again, showing our location as 3 miles west of where my map indicated we should be. Derek's compass was spinning randomly and my satellite phone couldn't acquire signal despite the clearing overhead. "Equipment's fucked," Derek muttered, tapping his GPS unit. Moisture must have gotten into the circuits. But equipment doesn't fail simultaneously unless there's interference. In my 8 years with the Park Service, I'd learned that the Olympic Peninsula has areas with unusual magnetic properties, something to do with the iron content in the soil and the proximity to fault lines. It affects navigation equipment in ways that aren't well documented. We were on our own, navigating by landmarks and instinct. Around noon, we found Iris's day pack. It was hanging from a branch about 8 feet off the ground, secured with paracord that had been tied with military precision knots. The pack had been opened, contents examined, then carefully repacked. Her research notebooks were still inside, along with sample containers, a water purification system, and energy bars. But her personal items, wallet, keys, phone, were missing. "Why would she hang her pack like that?" Amy asked, staring up at it. Derek was already shinning up the tree to retrieve it. "Bear precaution," he called down. "You hang food and scented items so animals can't get them." But I'd seen bear precautions. This wasn't one. The height was wrong. You hang bear bags at least 12 feet up and 4 feet from the trunk. This pack was positioned at exactly the right height for a human to reach, and the knots were too sophisticated for emergency bear protocol. Someone had hung Iris's pack there, someone who wanted us to find it. Derek lowered the pack down, and we spread the contents on a fallen log to inventory them. That's when Amy found the note. It was tucked inside Iris's research notebook, written on a torn piece of paper in handwriting that definitely wasn't hers. Block letters, all capitals, written with what looked like charcoal. "She's safe for now. Keep following the trail. Come alone or she dies." The forest went completely silent. Even the constant drip of condensation seemed to stop. Derek and Amy stared at the note, then at me, waiting for me to make the decision that would determine whether we all made it out of those woods alive. "We call it in," I said, reaching for my satellite phone. "This is now a criminal investigation." But the phone was dead. Not low battery, completely dead, as if the circuits had been fried. Derek's radio produced nothing but static, and Amy's emergency beacon wasn't transmitting. We were 8 miles deep in one of the most remote areas of Olympic National Park, with a kidnapper who knew we were coming, and had somehow disabled our communication equipment. The fog was rolling in again, and we had maybe 3 hours of daylight left. "We go back," Derek said. "We hike out, get back up, come back with a full search and rescue team." Amy was photographing the note. "What if he kills her while we're gone? The note says to keep following the trail." I looked at both of them. Derek, experienced but cautious, wanting to follow protocol. Amy, rookie eager to be a hero, willing to take risks that could get us all killed. The decision was mine to make as team leader, and I knew that whatever I chose, it would haunt me for the rest of my life. "We follow the trail," I decided. "But we stick together, and we document everything. If this goes bad, someone needs to be able to tell people what happened." The trail led us deeper into the old growth, toward a section of forest I'd never seen on any official park maps. The trees here were ancient, Douglas firs and Sitka spruces that had been growing since before Columbus reached America. Their trunks were so massive that 3 people holding hands couldn't encircle them, and their canopy created a permanent twilight even at midday. Iris's boot prints were clear in the moss, but now they were accompanied by the larger military boots, 2 sets of tracks walking side by side. Either Iris was cooperating with her captor, or she was being forced to walk at gunpoint. Every 50 yards we found markers, pieces of bright orange surveyor's tape tied to branches at eye level. Someone was making sure we didn't lose the trail, someone who wanted us to find what was waiting at the end. The temperature was dropping as the fog thickened. My breath was visible, and I could feel the cold seeping through my jacket. Derek had developed a cough, the kind you get when you've been breathing too much moisture for too long. Amy kept checking her equipment obsessively, frustrated that nothing was working. At 3:30 p.m., we heard the screaming. It came from ahead of us, maybe a quarter-mile away, echoing through the trees in a way that made it impossible to determine exact direction. A woman's voice, high and desperate, calling for help. Then silence. "Iris," Amy whispered, and started moving toward the sound. I grabbed her arm. "Wait, listen." We stood motionless for 5 minutes, straining to hear anything. The forest had returned to its unnatural silence. No birds, no small animals, no sound of wind in the branches, just our breathing and the distant drip of condensation. "Could be a trap," Derek said quietly. "Someone trying to lure us." But we had to investigate. If Iris was alive and in immediate danger, we couldn't abandon her. We approached carefully, weapons drawn. I carried a .40 caliber Glock as standard Park Service issue. Derek had a .357 revolver, and Amy carried bear spray and a tactical knife. The trail led us to a natural clearing surrounded by massive stumps, evidence of logging from the early 1900s before the area became protected parkland. In the center of the clearing was a structure that shouldn't have existed. Someone had built a shelter using fallen logs and tarps, camouflaged so well that it was almost invisible until you were standing directly in front of it. Military engineering, designed for concealment and long-term occupancy. There were multiple rooms, a water collection system, even what looked like a communications antenna. And sitting in front of the shelter, tied to a tree with professional restraints, was Iris Caldwell. She was alive, conscious, and terrified. Her clothes were dirty but intact, no obvious signs of physical injury. When she saw us, she started crying. Relief, fear, I couldn't tell which. "It's a trap," she whispered as we approached. "He's been waiting for you. He knows you're coming." Derek was scanning the tree line, weapon drawn. "Where is he?" "I don't know. He comes and goes. He's been here for months, maybe years. There are others." She gestured toward the shelter. "Bodies. He keeps trophies." Amy was working on Iris's restraints while I covered the perimeter. The ropes were paracord, tied with knots I recognized from military survival training. Whoever had done this knew what he was doing. "Who is he?" I asked. He said his name is Marcus, ex-Army, served in Afghanistan. "He's been living out here, hunting people who come into the deep forest." He said he's been watching the Park Service, learning patrol patterns, studying individual rangers. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the October air. "Studying rangers?" "He knows about you, Garrett. He knows your schedule, your routes, your procedures. He's been planning this." That's when I heard the click of a rifle bolt being cycled and a voice from the trees behind us. "Afternoon, Ranger Thorne, thanks for coming." I spun around, weapon raised, but saw nothing except shadows and fog. The voice had come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the massive tree trunks in a way that made it impossible to locate. "Let her go," I called out. "We can talk about whatever you want, but let her go first." Laughter. Cold, calculating, with an edge of madness. "I don't want to talk, Ranger. I want to hunt. And you three just became the most interesting prey I've had in months." Derek was turning in circles, trying to track the voice. Amy had gotten Iris free and was helping her stand. We were exposed in the clearing, surrounded by perfect sniper positions in the tree line. "There's nowhere to run," the voice continued. "I know every trail, every path, every hiding spot in 50 square miles. Your equipment doesn't work because I've been jamming your signals. Your GPS is feeding you false coordinates. Your compass points where I want it to point. Electronic warfare, military-grade signal jamming equipment. This wasn't some deranged survivalist. This was someone with advanced training and sophisticated equipment. "I'm going to give you a sporting chance," the voice said. "You have until dark to reach the river. That's about 4 miles northeast of here. If you make it, I'll let you live. If you don't..." A gunshot cracked through the forest, and bark exploded from a tree 3 feet from Derek's head. "Run!" We ran, through old-growth forest and gathering darkness with no functioning navigation equipment and a trained killer hunting us like animals. Derek took point. I brought up the rear, with Amy and Iris between us. We crashed through underbrush, leaped over fallen logs, splashed through hidden streams, moving as fast as we could while trying to stay quiet. Behind us, maybe 100 yards back, I could hear him following. Not running, walking, taking his time, confident that he could track us through the forest like wounded deer. "He's hurting us," Derek panted during a brief stop to catch our breath. "Pushing us towards something." I knew he was right. In the military, I'd done 2 tours in Iraq before joining the Park Service. We called it a kill box. You drive the enemy toward a predetermined position where you have maximum advantage. This Marcus wasn't just hunting us, he was maneuvering us. "We need to split up," I decided. "Make him choose." "No," Amy protested. "We stay together. If we stay together, we all die. Derek, take Iris north toward the Ho River. Amy and I will head east, try to draw him off." Derek nodded grimly. He understood tactical thinking. Amy looked terrified but determined. Iris was in shock, running on adrenaline and fear. "If anyone makes it out," I told them, "tell Captain Vasquez that Marcus has been living in grid section 7G for months. Military training, advanced equipment, multiple victims. This isn't his first time." We split up as darkness fell completely. Amy and I moved east through the forest, trying to make enough noise to attract Marcus's attention while not making so much that we couldn't hear him coming. It was a delicate balance. Sound carries strangely through old-growth forest, echoing and distorting in ways that can drive you insane if you think about it too much. Every shadow looked like a person. Every branch that moved in the breeze looked like someone signaling. Every sound, and there were sounds now as if the forest had awakened when the sun went down, could be Marcus closing in for the kill. My flashlight died first. Not the batteries. The entire unit just stopped working, as if the circuits had been fried. Amy's lasted another 20 minutes before it began flickering intermittently, casting dancing shadows that made navigation impossible. We were lost in complete darkness in one of the most remote forests in North America, being hunted by someone who could see in the dark and knew the terrain better than we did. "Garrett," Amy whispered. "I can hear him." I stopped and listened. Footsteps, maybe 50 yards behind us, moving steadily through the forest. Not trying to be quiet anymore. He knew he had us. "This way," I whispered, pulling Amy toward what I hoped was thicker cover. We crawled under a massive fallen log, pressing ourselves against the wet earth and trying to control our breathing. The footsteps came closer, stopped directly above us, then continued on. He was playing with us. We lay there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes listening to him move around us in a circle, sometimes close enough that we could hear his breathing, sometimes far enough away that we wondered if he'd given up. Then Amy's flashlight died completely and we were in absolute darkness. That's when he started talking. "I know you're close," his voice drifted through the trees. "I can smell your fear. It's a distinctive scent. Cold sweat, adrenaline, the metallic taste of panic. I've been tracking it for hours." Amy's hand found mine in the darkness, squeezing so hard I thought she might break bones. "You want to know why I do this, Ranger Thorne? Because I can. Because out here your badges and your training and your procedures don't mean anything. Out here I'm God." A branch cracked directly above us. He was standing on the log we were hiding under. "The forest belongs to me now. I've been here for 2 years, learning every trail, every hiding spot, every place where cell phones don't work and GPS gets confused. I know which rangers patrol which sectors, and when. I know who's experienced and who's green. I know who will fight and who will break." Amy was shaking so hard I thought Marcus would hear it. "Your friend Derek is good. Military training, I'd guess. He'll make it interesting. But the girl with you, Amy, right? She's going to crack. They always crack when they realize their equipment won't save them. He jumped down from the log and landed maybe 3 feet from where we were hiding. I could smell him. Wood smoke, wet earth, and something else. Something that smelled like death. Come out, Amy. Make this easy on yourself. I felt her start to move, panic overriding survival instinct. I held her tight, knowing that if she revealed our position, we were both dead. No? Well then, let's try some motivation. The screaming started from the north. Derek's voice, high and desperate, echoing through the forest in a way that made my blood freeze. It went on for maybe 30 seconds, then cut off abruptly. Your turn, Ranger Thorn. That's when I made the decision that saved our lives and destroyed my career. I had one trick Marcus didn't know about. During my second tour in Iraq, our unit had been trapped in a building by insurgents who were systematically hunting us room by room. My squad leader, Sergeant Martinez, had taught me something that wasn't in any manual: how to use sound as a weapon in close quarters. I still had my emergency whistle, a Fox 40 Classic that produces 115 decibels and can be heard from 2 miles away. In the acoustic chamber created by the massive trees, it would be like setting off a flashbang grenade. I waited until Marcus's footsteps were directly in front of our hiding spot. Then I blew that whistle with every ounce of air in my lungs. The sound was deafening. It echoed off the tree trunks, amplified and reverberated, creating a wall of noise that completely disoriented anyone within 50 yards. Marcus screamed, not in pain, but in surprise and rage. "Run!" I whispered to Amy, and we crawled out from under the log and ran blind through the forest. Behind us, Marcus was shouting, crashing through the underbrush, no longer trying to be stealthy. The whistle had destroyed his night vision and his hearing, giving us maybe a 5-minute head start. We ran toward where we'd heard Derek screaming, hoping he was still alive, hoping we could find him before Marcus recovered. The forest was a maze of obstacles in the darkness: fallen logs, hidden streams, root systems that grabbed your ankles and sent you sprawling. Amy fell hard, landing face first in a patch of moss that probably saved her from serious injury. I helped her up, and that's when we saw the light. A campfire, maybe 200 yards ahead, flickering through the trees. Either Derek had managed to start a fire, or Marcus had set a trap. We had no choice but to investigate. We approached carefully, staying low, moving from tree to tree. As we got closer, I could see the fire was burning in another small clearing, and there were shapes around it. Human shapes. Derek was tied to a tree, conscious but bleeding from a head wound. And sitting by the fire, cleaning what looked like a military-issue knife, was Marcus. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, lean and weathered, with the kind of alertness that comes from constant vigilance. He wore military surplus gear that had been modified for forest camouflage, and his movements had the efficiency of someone who'd killed before. "Ranger Thorn," he called out without looking up from his knife. "Bring the girl and come into the light. Let's finish this properly." I looked at Amy. Her face was scratched and muddy, but her eyes were determined. She'd found her courage somewhere in that dark forest. "What do you want to do?" I whispered. "Save Derek," she whispered back. "Then kill this bastard." We had one advantage. Marcus thought he'd broken us. He'd been playing psychological games for hours, and he expected us to be paralyzed with fear. Instead, we were pissed off. I still had my service weapon, and Amy had her tactical knife. Derek was injured but alert, which meant he might be able to help if we could create a distraction. "I'm coming out," I called to Marcus. "Let Derek go, and we'll talk." "No negotiation," Marcus replied. "You come out or I start cutting pieces off your friend." He moved toward Derek with the knife, and that's when I made my move. I stepped into the firelight with my weapon drawn, sighting down on Marcus's center mass. 20 feet, perfect shot, no way to miss. "Drop the knife." Marcus smiled. "You won't shoot me, Ranger. You're trained to preserve life, even mine. It's what makes you weak." He was wrong. I put 2 rounds center mass, and Marcus went down hard. The sound of gunshots in the forest was deafening, echoing off the trees like thunder. But as I moved toward Derek to cut him loose, Marcus rolled over and started laughing. Body armor, military-grade ceramic plates that had stopped both rounds. He was winded but not seriously injured, and now he had a pistol in his hand. "My turn," he said, and fired. The bullet caught me in the left shoulder, spinning me around and dropping me to the ground. Pain like fire spread down my arm and across my chest. Amy screamed and rushed toward me, which saved her life because Marcus's second shot went wide. Derek, still tied to the tree, was working frantically on his bonds. "Amy, the fire! Use the fire!" She grabbed a burning branch from the campfire and swung it at Marcus like a club. He dodged back and she swung again, forcing him away from Derek and me. "Clever girl," Marcus said, raising his pistol again. That's when Derek broke free. 8 years of Park Service fitness training and 12 years of experience don't disappear when you're tied to a tree. Derek hit Marcus from behind like a linebacker, driving him face first into the ground. The pistol went flying into the darkness. They rolled around in the dirt, fighting for control. Derek was bigger, but Marcus had combat training and wasn't wounded. Amy kept swinging the burning branch, trying to get a clear shot at Marcus without hitting Derek. I was losing blood fast, getting dizzy, but I managed to get to my knees and search for my weapon. Found it half buried in moss. Magazine empty. Derek's .357 was somewhere in his pack, which was somewhere in the dark forest. Marcus got on top of Derek and wrapped his hands around his throat. Derek was turning blue, losing consciousness. Amy swung the burning branch as hard as she could, catching Marcus across the back of the head. He rolled off Derek, stunned but not unconscious. Amy raised the branch to hit him again, and that's when he pulled the knife. It happened fast. Marcus lunged at Amy, knife extended. She tried to dodge, but the blade caught her across the ribs, opening a long gash that immediately started bleeding. She dropped the branch and staggered backward. Marcus stood up, knife in hand, looking at the three of us. Derek unconscious, me wounded and unarmed, Amy bleeding and weaponless. "This has been fun," he said, "but it's time to end it." He started toward Amy with the knife, and I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the burning branch she'd dropped and threw it into his pile of equipment. The tarps caught fire immediately, and within seconds his entire camp was burning. Whatever electronic jamming equipment he'd been using started sparking and smoking. His supplies, his weapons cache, his shelter, everything went up in flames. Marcus spun toward the fire, and Derek, who'd been playing unconscious, kicked him in the back of the knees. Marcus went down hard, and Derek grabbed the knife. "End of the hunt," Derek said, and drove the blade between Marcus's shoulder blades. Marcus arched his back, gasped once, and went still. The forest around us was burning now. The fire had spread to the dry undergrowth and was moving outward in all directions. We had maybe minutes before we were trapped in a wildfire with no way out. Derek helped me to my feet while Amy pressed her hand against the cut on her ribs. "Can you walk?" he asked. "I'll walk or die trying." We staggered away from the burning camp, following what we hoped was the direction of the river. Behind us, Marcus's body burned with his equipment, and the fire continued spreading through the forest. My shoulder was agony, and I was leaving a blood trail that any predator could follow. Amy was pale from blood loss, and Derek had a concussion that made him stumble every few steps. But we were alive, and Marcus was dead, and that was enough to keep us moving. We walked for 3 hours through burning forest, guided by the smell of water and the hope that the river would stop the fire from following us. When we finally reached the Ho River, we collapsed on the rocky shore and waited for dawn. Amy's emergency beacon started working as soon as we were away from Marcus's jamming equipment. The rescue helicopter found us at 6:47 a.m., October 18, 2019. I spent 4 days in Olympic Medical Center being treated for blood loss and infection. Amy needed 37 stitches but recovered fully. Derek had a severe concussion that left him with chronic headaches and ended his career with the Park Service. Iris Caldwell was found 2 days later, wandering Highway 101 12 miles south of the park. She was dehydrated and traumatized but physically unharmed. She never talked about what Marcus had done to her during the days she was missing, and I never asked. The fire burned 847 acres before being contained. The official report blamed it on an illegal campfire, but Derek and Amy and I knew the truth. Marcus's camp was found in the burned area. Charred equipment, remains of electronic devices, and enough evidence to confirm that he'd been living in the forest for at least 2 years. They also found graves, 7 of them, scattered around his camp, containing the remains of hikers and researchers who disappeared in Olympic National Park over the past 3 years. Cases that had been written off as people getting lost in the wilderness. Marcus hadn't told us his last name, and his fingerprints weren't in any database. The Army had no record of anyone matching his description. As far as the official investigation was concerned, he was John Doe, a ghost who had lived and died in the forest without leaving any trace of his real identity. But I know he was real. I have the scar on my shoulder to prove it, and the dreams that wake me up at 3 a.m., hearing footsteps circling my house in Vermont. The thing that haunts me most isn't the violence or the fear or even the knowledge that there might be others like Marcus living in remote areas of our national parks. It's the realization that all my training, all my experience, all my equipment and procedures and protocols were useless against another human being who had decided to become a predator. Animals kill for food or territory, or to protect their young. Marcus killed because he could. Because the wilderness gave him the perfect hunting ground and the Park Service gave him a steady supply of prey. I resigned from the National Park Service on November 15, 2019, moved to Vermont in December, started seeing a therapist in January 2020, married my wife Sarah in June 2021. She was a nurse I met during my recovery, and she's the only person who doesn't ask me why I won't go camping or why I check all the locks twice before bed. The official report classified Marcus as a lone wolf predator and recommended increased ranger patrols in remote areas. But I know that's not enough. There are places in our national forests where cell phones don't work, where GPS gets confused, where someone with the right training and equipment could live for years without being detected. Places where the predators aren't bears or mountain lions. They're other human beings who've decided that civilization's rules don't apply. Derek moved back to Montana after his medical retirement, but we stay in touch. He runs a hardware store now, like me, and he doesn't sleep well either. Amy left the Park Service 6 months after the incident and became a police detective in Seattle. She sends me updates sometimes, missing persons cases that remind her of Marcus, suspicious deaths in wilderness areas that don't quite add up. Last month, she called me about a case in North Cascades National Park, a researcher who disappeared while studying wolf migration patterns. They found her campsite intact, her equipment undisturbed, but no trace of her. The local rangers were calling it a wildlife attack, but Amy wasn't convinced. The footprints around her camp, she told me during our phone call, they're not animal tracks, and there are signs that someone had been watching her campsite for days before she disappeared. I told her to call the FBI, to push for a full investigation, to make sure they checked for electronic jamming equipment and looked for signs of long-term habitation in the area. Because if Marcus taught me anything, it's that some predators are smart enough to study their prey before they strike. The thing that keeps me awake at night isn't the memory of that October in Olympic National Park. It's the knowledge that somewhere out there, in the millions of acres of wilderness that make up our national forest system, there might be others like Marcus. Patient, intelligent, well-equipped predators who've learned that the best hunting ground isn't the urban jungle. It's the actual jungle, where people go to escape civilization and end up encountering something far worse than anything civilization ever produced. I think about Iris sometimes and what she said when we found her tied to that tree. There are others. At the time, I thought she meant other victims. Now I wonder if she meant other hunters. The Pacific Northwest is different from Vermont. Here the forests are younger, smaller, tamed by centuries of human habitation. The trees don't tower overhead like living skyscrapers, and the canopy doesn't block out the sun. You can get cell phone reception on most trails and GPS works reliably, but sometimes when I'm working late at the hardware store and I step outside to lock up, I hear sounds in the woods behind the building that remind me of that October night. The crack of a branch under someone's foot, the whisper of fabric against bark, the feeling of being watched by something that's deciding whether you're worth hunting. And I remember Marcus's voice echoing through the Olympic Peninsula rainforest. The forest belongs to me now. The official statistics say that approximately 600,000 people go missing in the United States every year. Most are found safe. Some are victims of foul play in urban areas. Others succumb to accidents or get lost in the wilderness. But some, a small percentage that doesn't make the national news, disappear in our national parks and forests under circumstances that suggest they encountered something that was hunting them deliberately. Something that understood their equipment, their procedures, their psychology. Something that had turned our most beautiful wilderness areas into a personal hunting preserve. The Park Service doesn't like to talk about it. Tourism is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and people need to believe that the greatest danger they'll face on a hiking trail is a twisted ankle or bad weather. They don't want to hear that sometimes. The thing tracking you through the forest walks on 2 legs and carries military-grade equipment. But I'm telling you now because someone needs to know. Someone needs to understand that when you venture into the deep wilderness, the areas where your phone doesn't work and your GPS gets confused, you're not just risking encounters with wild animals or natural hazards. You're risking encounters with predators who've learned that the wilderness provides perfect cover for the kind of hunting that civilization has made illegal. If you're planning a backcountry trip, especially to remote areas of national parks or forests, tell someone exactly where you're going and when you'll be back. Carry multiple forms of communication equipment. Travel in groups. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, if you have the sensation of being watched, if you find evidence of long-term human habitation in areas where it shouldn't exist, get out immediately and report it to authorities. And if you're ever in a situation like the one Amy and Derek and I faced that October night, if you realize you're being hunted by another human being in an area where help is hours or days away, remember that all your training and equipment and procedures mean nothing if your predator is smarter, better equipped, and more familiar with the terrain than you are. Your only advantage is that most of these predators, like Marcus, suffer from the same overconfidence that eventually destroys all apex predators. They start to believe they're invincible. They start taking risks. They start making mistakes. And when they do, you have to be ready to exploit those mistakes with everything you have because you probably won't get a second chance. It's 3:47 a.m. now as I finish telling this story. I'm sitting in my kitchen in Montpelier, Vermont, looking out at woods that are nothing like the Olympic Peninsula rainforest. The trees here are maple and birch and oak, not 1,000-year-old Sitka spruces. The forest floor is covered with fallen leaves, not centuries of moss. You can see the sky through the canopy and cell phones work perfectly fine, but I still check the locks twice before I go to bed. I still wake up some nights thinking I hear footsteps circling the house, and I still haven't spent a single night alone in the woods since October 18, 2019. Because I know now that the most dangerous predator in any wilderness isn't the one with claws and fangs. It's the one with opposable thumbs and the intelligence to use them. The one that's learned to turn our national parks into hunting preserves. The one that might still be out there in some remote corner of our vast wilderness system, studying patrol patterns and learning the habits of people who come to the forest seeking peace and solitude. People like Iris Caldwell. People like me and Amy and Derek. People like you if you're not careful. My name is Garrett Thorne, and this is why I moved 1,000 miles away from the most beautiful forest in America, and why I'll never go back. Some places change you. Some places mark you, and some places are home to things that shouldn't exist in a civilized world. If you ever find yourself in one of those places, remember what I learned that October night. The scariest monster in any forest is the one that looks just like you. Recording ends.